Good afternoon and welcome to the Pittsburgh Land Bank of February 11th, 2022. Our first order of business is roll call. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Reverend Ricky Burgess,
Here.
Dr. Jamil Bey,
I'm here on Zoom.
Councilman Lavelle,
Here.
Senator Fontana,
Here on Zoom.
Director Bobby Wilson,
Here.
Director Steve Mazza, Director Wanda Wilson,
Present.
Director Karen Breen. We have quorum.
Thank you very much. That brings us to public comment. Is there anyone online who wants to address this Land Bank Board of Directors? Do we have any public comments online?
I don't believe we have public comment.
All right, there is no public comment. That gets to my report, which is, no, before that, the approval of December 21 minutes. They were emailed to you. I need a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers? Thank you very much. That brings us to my report. I have a couple of things to announce. We have a board resignation. Doug Anderson resigned from the Pittsburgh Land Bank Board of Directors in December 2021. He was former director of finance for the city of Pittsburgh. Doug Anderson has taken on a new role at PNC Bank. And so we will hopefully, after the administration fulfills that role, his former role in government as director, perhaps that person will also take this role too, but we'll have to see what the administration's plans are. That takes us to the executive director's update.
Thank you, Chairman. So I have a few updates today. I am going to ask PLB/URA staff to assist in some of this presentation, but I will certainly begin. The first announcement is that we have a PLB staffing update, and we are here to announce that Greg Miller, the former PLB manager, did tender his resignation at the end of January. He resigned from his position, but during his time, he helped to achieve significant milestones for the PLB. These were including but not limited to the GRB law agreement between the PLB and City of Pittsburgh, which is notable, the memorandum of understanding between PLB and PWSA, and much improved relationships with the CDC, CBOs, and other land recycling stakeholders. It is important that we inform the board that we do have a transition plan. This will be overseen by myself, URA Executive Director Greg Flisram, the URA Senior Advisor David Geiger, and the URA's Chief Legal Officer Nathan Clark, and a host of other staff, many of whom are here today. In the interim, ML Meyer, Ken Jones, Matt Sanders, and Emily Kawchak will be working with other supporting staff to be the main points of contact moving forward. We do anticipate a discussion with the board as to your preferred staffing plan for 2022 at a board retreat, which is underway, which is being scheduled. And for that strategic planning session, I'm not going to walk through all of this, but you will be receiving communication. I did want to highlight for the board some of what you can anticipate during that strategic planning session. What we'd like to know as staff serving this board, we want to know how we did in 2021. We believe that we should be measured. Our work should be quantified, and the board should respond to how well we're upholding our end of our MOU/cooperative agreement. We will look at the PLB's operating budget and its current state of financials. We'll talk about PLB priorities, and then 2022 staffing and fundraising as it relates to the ARPA allocation that was awarded by City Council. We will be issuing a survey to the board. We will want to understand in advance of the retreat your priorities, your vision, what you think will make the PLB successful, and how do you feel what do you feel could be done to ensure that you are successful in your role as a board member? That's going to be very important for us to understand. I'm going to pause there in case the board has any questions. The chairman has any questions about Greg's resignation and the plan moving forward.
No, we've actually talked offline about this, and so with you being the overall director of this process, I have great confidence in the interim staff and the ability to replace him finally when the time comes.
So with that, I am going to turn over the next update regarding the PLB and city's GRB law contract to Matt Sanders. He is our associate counsel who's been working on land bank matters and has been a critical partner with Emily Kawchak in making today's board meeting possible. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Doctor. Just to give you an update on the GRB law contract, this board at the last board meeting approved a contract with GRB Law, the land bank, and the city, where GRB Law would provide quiet title legal services to the city on city-owned properties, and the land bank would help pay those costs. Since then, GRB Law has received the first batch of title searches to start the quiet title process. They actually received the last of those today, and they will be filing the first 12 quiet title actions at the start of next week. We've also been in collaboration with the city about a second batch of properties that will go through the process. The city has provided us a list of 20 properties that GRB Law can start beginning the title search process for. But in collaboration with the city, we will be reviewing those properties and determining if there's any other properties that are also a priority that need to have the process started as well. So I'll stop there, and if any of the board has any questions.
Bobby, Mr. Wilson?
That update, I just want to know, are you in communication with the finance department about that? The additional 20?
Yes, we are.
How do they gather that?
How do they gather the 20 properties?
Did they tell you their process for how they group them?
So one of the important parts about this contract is that the city is the client for our donation agreement with GRB Law. So we really leave most of the properties and city priorities and ongoing CDC communication. They have the first say, and we at the land bank can weigh in. But a lot of these properties, the city already had title searches on, and we speak with them. And for those that they've started, they send over to GRB Law. And other properties are prioritized because their titles were due out years ago. And some properties, title searches are due out in 2020. And so by way of those dates and city priorities, we at the land bank can give our suggestions, but we are not the client.
I have other questions. Thanks. I just want to get that on part.
Sure.
You just understand who you're communicating with.
So another item we have on the agenda today is we thought that it might be beneficial to the board and to the public is to illuminate a little bit of what happens behind the scenes with the quiet title process. It's a very complicated and at times complex endeavor. And so we have made a commitment to be as transparent as possible and to show what happens behind the curtain. So the staff here will also present the quiet title process. It's very high level. There is some detail there, but we didn't want to bombard you with detail, but we do want to illuminate some of the challenges and opportunities that are present.
Sure. So I'll give you sort of the 5,000-foot view of how this process works, because it is the legal process that can be somewhat difficult to navigate, and there are a lot of different things that could go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this slide and explain sort of what the process from start to finish and what we can sort of expect timeline-wise from when we start the quiet title process to when we actually receive quiet title. And then after that, I'm going to kind of explain to the board what I hope you sort of take out of this, because a lot of this stuff is the the legal process itself and how it actually happens behind the scenes. So the first step in a quiet title action is actually getting a title report. So to file a quiet title action, and you need to know what other parties have an interest in the property, because they're going to be the defendants in the case. So in the case of the GRB law contract, the city has already provided the title reports to GRB law for the first 12. So they're about to start the process and filing the complaint to quiet the title. So at that point, GRB law needs to determine whether the defendants can be located or not. So sometimes with these properties, the previous owner is deceased and the property has been passed down to multiple heirs, or sometimes people are just transient and it's difficult to find them. So GRB law will make a good faith effort to try to find where these people are located. And that's done through different public methods. If they're able to locate them, they can serve them personally, actually hand them a copy of the complaint, and that can be done within 30 days. If we can't determine if they're deceased or not, we have to first attempt to personally serve them. And if we can't find them, we do what's called alternative service, which is basically putting a advertisement in a locally circulated newspaper, as well as posting a copy of the complaint at the actual site at the most publicly facing place. And that can be done in lieu of actually having to find the person, because sometimes with certain properties that have certain legacy issues, it could be very difficult to impossible to trace down every single person who might have an interest in the property. So after the service is completed, every defendant who has received a copy of the complaint has 20 days to file an answer. Normally in these situations, the defendants aren't filing answers. So like if the defendant is, say, the city, and the city has a tax lien, or if it's the county or the school district, sometimes they won't file an answer and try to protect the lien. They'll just let it go. And that's the kind of default, what happens most of the time. Occasionally, you'll have a defendant who is served who will file an answer and try to protect their lien. In that case, what happens next is kind of a process. We generally have to negotiate with the other side and try to find alternative ways to clear that lien. Once we've worked through all of the liens, whether the defendants haven't filed an answer or whether we've worked with them after filing an answer, we present a motion to the court to quiet the title. At that point, the court will order will file a quiet title order, and the land bank will have quiet title on and the property will be ready to transfer it ultimately to the end user. What I want kind of the board to understand about this process is that it's not necessarily linear. What properties go in first for a quiet title action aren't necessarily going to be the ones that come out, right? The process is also very like property specific. So each property is going to have their own set of defendants that we're going to have to try to locate. They're going to have their own set of liens. There might also be other issues with easements and other encumbrances on the property that we're going to have to address. So timeline wise, in the best case scenario, if we're able to personally serve every defendant and nobody files an answer and there's really no other outstanding issues, we can push through a quiet title action in a few months. What I think is probably more likely to happen with the properties that the land bank is going to be taken care of is that it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that, and that there's going to be service issues and there could be other outstanding legacy issues that our outside counsel is going to have to determine and work through. So after consulting with our outside counsel, the average time of getting a quiet title action through is somewhere between 4 and 6 months. But there is a possibility that if we can't find the defendants, that it could be quite a bit longer than that. And if there is other problems in clearing the title, as in somebody files an answer, or there are other people that want to protect their interest in the property, it could take quite a bit longer than that. So I think that it's just important that the board knows, sort of sets realistic expectations for when these properties are going to come out, because it's also going to affect our ability to transfer those properties to an end user. And in our ability to work with those end users to give them a realistic expectation of when they can expect to receive the properties. So I know that was a lot and probably a lot of legal jargon, but if there's any questions from the board, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you for that, Matt.
Bobby,
I just want to know, how long does it take from, to petition the court for alternative service?
So if you petition the court for alternative service, it takes about 60 days for publication to put it into a publicly sourced newspaper. That's usually the period of 60 days. If you can't determine that the person's deceased beforehand, you have to attempt to serve them, which takes 30 days. And then you file for a motion of alternative service, and that takes potentially another 60. So it could take somewhere between 30 days and 90 days to actually to complete an alternative service.
I really like this chart. Thanks for laying it out. So this is the one process. Can you explain how this differs from the county sheriff's sale?
So the sheriff's sale, you get clear title at the sale. So in the sheriff's sale, you're going to put everyone on notice beforehand. And there's also going to be a part before the sheriff's sale where people are allowed to pay the upset price, which is basically pay off the liens that are on the property, that somebody submitted the property to the sheriff's sale to satisfy. If they don't pay that upset price, the property, the person who took it to the sheriff's sale can ask the court to quiet the title on the spot. So there isn't the whole, so you can actually quiet the title in a day, but you're also doing the notice part before the sheriff's sale. You have to put everyone on notice before the sheriff's sale. And then at the sheriff's sale, you have a chance to pay the upset price, and then you can quiet it that day.
Thanks for explaining all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Madam Director.
All right, no other questions. So we will move on to a brief overview of the status of the tri-party cooperation agreement. Matt, I believe you're also covering this one. Okay.
So the board at the last board meeting approved a MOU between the URA and the land bank for how properties transfer from the URA to the land bank. We also discussed at the time that there would need to be an amendment to the tri-party agreement that codifies a process from transfers from the city to the land bank. And we have been in conversations with the city about the terms of that agreement. We've been in conversation with them for a few months, and I think that we have the majority of the terms down. The city would prefer to hold off on executing any tri-party amendment until a new finance director, a permanent finance director, has been approved. Just to get that person's, final blessing on the document. So we've been in cooperation with them and in conversations with them, and we expect this to be signed when the new finance director is appointed.
Next, we have the PLB Qualified End User Consideration Scorecard. One of the conversations we've been having here at the board table has been, how do you engage with the land bank? How do we ensure that that is as equitable and fair as possible? So Emily has done some amazing work around beginning to think through this from a policy standpoint, and she's going to share with the board some of that early stage thinking. Again, this is open for response and for additional engagement, but want to illuminate for you what we're thinking at this juncture.
Mhm. Thank you, Dr. Walker. So as you all know, our policies and procedures help guide the land bank. And as they were created in 2018, a lot of them we need to elaborate as we take our first steps in our disposition process. and create these new processes that we want the land bank to be intended for. And so out of section 5.03 in our policies and procedures elaborates on our end user qualification. And so what the PLB and URA shared staff did and what our data and GIS specialist, Tim Dolan, created is this scorecard consideration sheet. And so in our policies and procedures, we know that an end user has to own no real property that has unremediated citations or violations of state and local property codes and ordinances, has no property that is tax delinquent or was tax delinquent when the prospective end user transferred the property, has no property that's subject to a judgment in a tax foreclosure process, and does not have a delinquent water account with the City of Pittsburgh's Water and Sewer Authority or other local water utility. And so we took this information and we have this scorecard. And within these different categories that you'll see in your board packets and also on the slide, we have a general considerations, a priority guidelines for commercial properties, additional considerations for commercial properties, and discretionary information. And while each of these categories has a score from 1 to 5 with a total score of, say, an applicant submitting a property transfer application, a total score would be 20, they aren't weighted the same with the staff, as general considerations such as zoning and special use requirements are weighted higher than, say, discretionary information. That is more up to our PLB and URA shared staff expertise. And so we plan on walking through an example of this in board briefing or executive sessions to follow this. But this is sort of an introduction to our board to show you what we as staff are working on and what we do for the day-to-day operations of the land bank. So if you have any questions, I welcome those.
Any questions? Thank you very much. This is actually helpful because that's one of the things I've been somewhat vocal about, was to set up an external process so that as we begin to distribute land, that there be a process that was consistent so that there is no one-off, so that whatever we do will go through the same process, the same determination, and to be a fair and equitable process that's transparent. And I thank you for starting that process.
Thanks for going over that, and I wanted to be prepared. I just didn't see it in the, like we were talked about, you would go over it here since it wasn't in the the initial packet. Was this something that Greg was working on prior? Like, can you explain the process to get to what we see here?
Absolutely. Yeah. So precisely as Chairman Burgess explained, we did not have a process in place that fairly and numerically ranked our applicants that submitted property transfer applications through the PLB's available properties. And so much of our choice in a qualified end user was really based on conversations, on internal working groups and meetings, but this allows us to put, say, a name and run it through all of these columns and all of these considerations and to have a number. And so our higher scores are more appropriate end users that benefit community, follow our zoning and development requirements, and have done the work beforehand. And so this is a step in the right direction for us as we start acquiring and going through a disposition process of more and more properties, but it's a way to fairly and equitably do this for everyone.
So there's a score, and so what I'm seeing here, everything behind these items here is a scale, like a Likert scale, 1 to 10.
Correct. Yes. So each of these, so if we went through category A for general considerations, and we have these 5 subcategories, an example of, say, a tax foreclosure prior to this land bank transfer is you would have a ranking of 1 to 5 under that subcategory. And the highest ranking 5 would say a prospective end user is not an individual or business entity that was the owner of a property at the time of a tax foreclosure action, which transferred title to the land bank. It is to say that 1 would be an end user who is disqualified, and 5 would bring them up to a high score and allow them to continue through our other disposition categories.
Just curious, like we just take tax delinquency.
Mhm.
Is that's 1 to 5?
Yes,
So like how would you go from 1 to 5?
there
Based
are.
on the amount of money, amount of years that someone's delinquent? What does that mean?
Yeah, so there are some of these subcategories, like you're saying, they would automatically come with like a not applicable. And so because in our policies and procedures, our end user cannot own real property that is tax delinquent if they are to submit an application and be considered. So certain subcategories of this, so to speak, knocks them out of the score. And that's when staff would go back to the applicant, and that's when we would ask for additional materials.
When we get to it, is there going to be a very public way on the website to say, this is how we're going to score it? This is going to immediately knock you out.
Absolutely. Yes. We plan a lot of the graphics that are in our board packets for this meeting. Eventually, they will make it onto the website because the land bank is going to be as transparent and equitable as possible.
Can you just expand on some of the engagement, just to go back to that? Was there meetings that you had with local groups that are interested in housing?
Yeah.
Like what groups, like, for instance, at the city,
Mhm.
if we're going to build a new playground, we have this new process where we put on the engage page and people can go on and make comment and talk about it. I just want to know that, I just want to make sure that this is, something that there is community support for, even though we're all here charged with the best interest of the city and people that live here, and make sure it works for everyone. But I just want to know that there is some component where it's getting community support.
Yeah, that is a great comment and a great question. It's something that we at the Land Bank and the URA, we're still working on doing this groundwork. The Land Bank has a lot of what we could and what we should be doing, but we haven't until last year at the end and the beginning of this year really gotten to these stages to start thinking about how will we actually engage with community members. And so right now, we are putting our heads together internally, and we're putting together these graphics, and we're thinking about these processes. But we intend to meet more with our board members and also to continue ramping up operations.
Part of what we need to do, and what Emily's mentioning, is that we need to build sort of the framework to give community an opportunity to respond to. Those materials did not exist as of December. We used January. We were not preparing for a board meeting. So they started to put together the artifacts that will help to facilitate discussions and make it digestible for communities. I wanted to come here to the board first so you know how we're thinking. So if there's something here, that you want us to double down on or to maybe, modify, we have an opportunity to do that before we start engaging the public more fully. And in the board retreat, we will have a more quantified version of this that we can kind of explore. But again, I don't want to bombard you in that board retreat with things that you've not even been exposed to. So I think the team has done a really fantastic job of giving us something to nibble on preliminarily.
Yeah, great job. I just
Excellent question.
looking forward to it. So what's the timeline on getting to like the final, like if we were gonna take a vote on this at some time, like when would we?
My goal would be able to start voting things into policy like mid Q2. I think that's where, seems like a pretty tenable timeline. But again, we want to put together a work plan and set some benchmarks so that, again, the board and the public can hold us accountable. But these are some of the priorities that I've identified that I think are, things I've heard the board talk about that you want to see. So, we're illuminating it a little bit today.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if I could, I'd like to see, guidelines for residential properties, not just commercial.
Yep, of course, Director Wilson. I know we targeted commercial properties first because a property that is headed toward the land bank's disposition process is our mixed use property on Six Boggs Avenue. And so this is a way to prepare ourselves to enter into that process as well. But you are absolutely correct.
Making a note here for a parallel track for residential properties. we'll make sure that's done. So the last item, and I'm actually really excited about this one because I think it's come up quite a few times. What is the actual PLB disposition process? I think this is some relatively new thinking. We've been looking at this for about 14 months and we are ready to synthesize that into a very smart graphic that I'm sure represents most of it, but there's more detail to it. I mean, we can unpack that in the upcoming weeks. But Emily, I believe that you and Matt may be reviewing this one together.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I know Ken Jones, if you would like to explain our disposition process as well, you're welcome to shed light on this. But I created this timeline after looking at our policies and procedures because what you read in our document does not always translate well to a timeline. And how do we take that information and put it into practice? Just like these previous graphics are also attempting to do. And so when we view our disposition process timeline, the first step is for a resident, community group, interested party, or other stakeholder is to submit a property transfer application through our website. And so as per our policies and procedures, the land bank accepts applications up until the date that we've entered into a purchase and sale agreement. Our second step is upon selection of a qualified end user, we are required per our policies and procedures to post a public notice and also to post physical signage at the property. And this includes information about the end user, the consideration, and the proposed reuse at least 30 days prior to executing a purchase and sale agreement. And one of the things that was overlapping with this step is board approval. How does our board play into these decisions? Because much of the work is also done by our PLB and URA shared staff. And so prior to entering into a purchase and sale agreement, our end user must be approved by 2/3 vote from the board of directors. Once we gain approval from an end user, this is when we post this public information. And this is how we accept interested parties that object to this process. And so the land bank's objection process is different from some of the community groups in the city of Pittsburgh, which makes it very necessary for us to be transparent about this. Interested parties may file a petition within 20 days of the land bank's posting of these online notices and signage. And if we receive 15 or more objections, we are required to hold a predisposition public hearing in the neighborhood where this property is being put up for sale. And so if it is determined based on testimony at the public hearing that this disposition is consistent with the goals and needs of the neighborhood and is likely to benefit the neighborhood, and as well as this disposition is approved by 2/3 vote of the entire board of directors, we can go ahead with our selected end user. But if this is not done, then we have to go back and repeat this process, and we have to select the most appropriate end user that can contribute to the needs and the values of a community. Once we select our end user, we will close on a property, and this shall occur within 6 months from the date of the purchase and sale agreement was entered into. And this is another reason why in your board packets, we had drafted commercial and residential purchase and sale agreements. If you have any questions, I also welcome those from the board.
So
It's a great high-level overview.
can I ask about timing here? So for a residential, on a residential property, a single person or a young couple wants to buy something, the timeline here would take them almost to a year. Do I have this right?
The timeline varies considerably. So similar to our quiet title process, this is under best circumstances. So you are correct, but it could certainly take longer as well.
One of the issues there, if they're getting financing, I guess, for the property, in other words, they're looking for a mortgage or need to get a mortgage, a lot of times you can't hold in a a rate, an interest rate for more than 60 days or so. So I mean, you don't want to discourage, young people from purchasing these properties. So that's just a little bit of a concern about that. I assume they'll be going out and getting financing, from a bank or mortgage company out there. And a lot of times they don't commit for longer than 60 or 90 days to a rate, to hold a rate in. So just throwing it out there for consideration.
So I might be able to touch on that. The 6-month closing period from like the signing of the contract for sale. That's a number that's set in our policies and procedure, but it can certainly be well before that, right? So we set that 6-month period just because that's what is required for us in our documents right now, but we anticipate that closings would probably happen well before that. So if someone needs to lock in an interest rate, we could do it probably within that timeline.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Wilson?
Mike, question for you, but also may include yourself. Can you explain the disposition process, how it aligns with these other 2 previous items?
And when you say the other 2, you mean the
Sorry,
quiet
the
title?
Scorecard, yeah, for the public, for scorecard, and also the quiet title process.
Yeah. I know for the scorecard, how this aligns with our disposition process is that if the land bank receives 15 or so applications for a property, staff needs to go through these applications and say, as a previous board member mentioned, we have a young couple that wants to move in, or we have a developer that's interested in the community, or you even have another interested party that could be out of the state of Pennsylvania. We run each of these property transfer applications through this scorecard to determine the highest and best use. And so that will play a role in allowing us to have accountability, but also transparency, because we can numerically rank these applicants, and it's not just up to staff to decide the best use. It is also up to a system.
But right here, the first step, property transfer application is submitted through the PLB's website. Where does the scorecard show up on this?
The scorecard is what we will take a property transfer application, and then we will go through the scorecard with that application.
Okay.
So that provides us a first view into an applicant's development plans, into their financing, into their history with the community. But until we run it through our scorecard, we won't compare it to other applicants.
Thanks.
I think it's also important to stress that this is, again, we are proposing ways that this can be done. We are not mandating that this is how it should be done. And I think, again, it's a conversation starter, and it's going to be very helpful to hear from the board, and eventually the public as to the best way to do this. I do think that we need to be mindful of expedience. The goal here is to do blight remedy. And so we don't want to layer what's already a bureaucratic system, and this is supposed to be the solve. So where there are opportunities to reduce bureaucracy, that's what we're going to need to do.
Other questions, Mr. Wilson? Thank you for today's overview. It's been extremely helpful watching how we are progressing and how we will actually begin now to dispose of property. Is there anything else in the director's report?
The director's report is complete.
Okay, that takes us to finance report. I think all of you probably have received a financial report. There's one in your package that is invoice of 100. This was 100 and.
We do have Joe Karlovitz here to review the invoices and to request the board's approval. He'll walk through.
Thank you. I didn't see a name. So if you would do that, I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm Joe Karlovitz, Director of Finance, at the URA. As you see on the slides and in your board packet, because there was no January meeting, there's both a year-end report as well as a January report for your review. I won't go through line items here, but there is one action item, which is the URA administrative fee for 2021. This is in agreement with the administration plan that was adopted in March of 2021. The note for the board is that this is the minimum amount available that was per that agreement through the calendar year 2021. I do have a copy of the breakdown for the board in person. I'm sorry about those, and virtually, if you need it, I can distribute that, but that is the one item there. Other points here is that on the 2021 summary, you can see, as my colleagues were talking about with the legal bills, that was the largest other item that has ramped up in calendar year 2021. The final note will be that in prior board meetings, we've had comments about the bookkeeping and the accounting of the PLB, just echoing Dr. Walker's comments that this will be part of the conversation at the strategic retreat.
Okay. I need a motion to receive this report and to approve the payment to the URA for its administrative support. Is there such a motion? Any conversation about this? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, thank you very much. Opposers, nay. No nays. Takes us to the legislative updates. Senator Fontana.
Oh, thank you, Reverend Burgess. Couple things. As far as House Bill 610 is concerned, it's been, as they say, put on the table, and when that happens, it stays there. So that's over in the House. But just this past week, I've met in Harrisburg along with Senator Costa, Mayor Gainey, Jake Wheatley, and some of our staff, Senate staff, about the municipal claims and tax lien legislation that I have. It's not, obviously, as I reported in the past, it's not being moved by the majority party. However, as we're into the budget, the governor gave his budget address last week. We'll be in appropriations hearings going forward. One of the strategies, as we sat around the table and talked about another way to do this, maybe would be to get it into the fiscal code, which a lot of times is a lot easier to do. So we're going to pursue an extra avenue here, or another avenue, I should say, in trying to get this done. The mayor and Jake Wheatley expressed to Senator Costa and the staff how important it is to get this law passed. So as I mentioned, we're looking at other strategies to do that as we move forward. I wouldn't expect, hopefully by the end of June, that's when our fiscal year is up, and hopefully the budget will be passed. By that time, hopefully we'll find a solution, which may be the fiscal code to put this tax lien law into. So that's my report. Thank you. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much for your report. Any questions? Seeing none. Is there any new business before us?
No business from URA or PLB staff.
All right, I want to make three comments that I've been thinking about. One is, and this is something for us to think about. At least two of the things, I'll do those first. The two are legislative. Council rejected this year Wilkinsburg's attempt for us to annex them. That there is a process that the city now is doing to investigate annexation for next year's ballot, which would mean annexation for us 2023. And so I know Wilkinsburg, I think, is part of a TriCog land bank. I'm pretty sure they are. And so I want to suggest to the land bank staff, just as the URA is going to probably be notified to begin to look at what annexation of Wilkinsburg would do to your operation, I think the land bank needs to seriously now think about what that would mean to us and how that would change things. I think there is a strong likelihood that council will approve If a petition comes to us next year, I think it's a strong likelihood that I can't guarantee it, but I'll put on my prophetic hat, crystal ball, or it depends on your viewpoint, right? I think there's a strong likelihood that council will pass such an annexation proposal. It will go between the voters in May of 2022, 2023, I guess. It'll be 2000, wait a minute, we're in 22 now, right? So they would go to voters 2022, and they would become part of the city January 2023. That's the time frame, right? Because what happens is we have to vote to let them vote. They would vote in a May, it can vote anytime, but theoretically vote in the May primary. And then that following January, they're automatically part of our city. And so I think that gives us a window, but not forever. And so we need to think about that addition to our city and what that would mean to the land bank, number one. Number two, and I'm using this forum to say something that I'm going to say over and over again. And so please, if you would just allow me this moment. I introduced legislation that will be talked about on Wednesday at our standing committee's meeting of creating an affordable housing finance and implementation committee. I, along with Mr. Lavelle and Mr. Wilson, we are serious about trying to increase the amount of housing units, especially affordable housing units in the city of Pittsburgh. I've given this great thought over my tenure on council. I think I said this statement, I said it privately, but I probably can say it publicly. I do believe that between Mr. Lavelle and I, if you put us together, we have participated in more affordable housing development projects than any two people in the last who are still in government over the last 15 years. I pretty much will stand by that statement. I think it's probably true. We've been pretty much, its authors and architects. And we are in agreement that we have to do something to increase. The Housing Opportunity Fund was a way, but it's not enough. It's been effective, it's not enough. And so I'm going to suggest to you that this committee, which the Land Bank Executive Director is one of the people on that committee, along with the URA Director, the proposed, the Housing Authority Director, Mayor's Office, Council, a collaborative, but there are, at least in my head, and that this is the moment I'm gonna give you my most mature thinking. I may be wrong, but this is the Ricky Burgess sort of view of how to do affordable housing generation, and hopefully it'll get some traction. There are three things I think that we have to do, and I'm going to argue it has to be done simultaneously and it has to be done now. I think first of all, we have to come up with some vehicle to incentivize private developers to incorporate affordable housing in their market rate units. That has to happen immediately. That is that the city is growing, but we're growing by building these market rate units and displacing or displacing by or just letting rot, units in African American communities, and they're moving out. So we're stabilizing, but we're bringing in mostly affluent non-African Americans into the city, where lower incomes African Americans are fleeing the city. And so we have to figure out a way to put more affordable housing in these market rate developments. We have to find an incentive, and my argument's going to be it cannot be a hammer, but it has to be a carrot. So what can we do? Can we change zoning? Can we give them a right development by rights if they have 10%? That's my number, because that's the number that came over from the Affordable Housing Task Force. I think that's the number, 10% affordable housing units. Units are, I'm getting in the weeds now, but 10 units above, 10%, some number like that. Affordable housing gets this opportunity. At least they have to do workforce, which would be 80% or below of housing, something like that, back of the envelope kind of thought. And then, so that's number one. I won't talk, I'm talking too much about that. Number two, I've seen this in other cities. I've looked at it. I think we need we need to create a private-public partnership financial trust and get the banks, private dollars, to create this revolving loan fund, which my goal is somewhere around $200 million from their reinvestment funds to a public-private partnership agency that provides low revolving loan funds, both for pre-development and for development causes. I think that's right. And I think that then the third thing so that you get the private market to participate in a significant way. And then the third thing is something that we actually brought up, Councilman Lavelle and I have been advocating for this quietly for, I guess, what, 4 years now? And that is that the city should take out a bond, whether it's through using the Housing Opportunity Fund as a vehicle or some other vehicle, whether it's a referendum or something, as we've done in other taxes, an increased tax. But I think we need to put on the table somewhere between $100 to $250 million cash upfront in a place to incentivize affordable housing. I think those three tools, which are all financial, can be done, should be done, must be done if we're serious about building affordable housing. We do not need more studies. We've done the studies. We know how to do this. It's simply a matter of capital. If we put the capital on the table, we can, and by the way, so let me go in my soapbox. I am not advocating for something new. Pittsburgh has done this before. The URA in particular has done this before, but they did it for market rate and commercial activity. They used a fund, which was supposed to be tax relief for the citizens in Pittsburgh. They redirected that dollar into a loan, into repayment of a loan that they took out and create this large loan fund to assist primarily, not only, but primarily market rate and commercial development in the city. It was extraordinarily effective. We did it. It worked. We know it works. But now it was time to help affordable housing in poor communities. People are like, wow, that's a lot of money. I'm not sure we can do that. Of course we can do it. We've already done it. And so I'm going to be yelling, screaming, jumping up on tables now to say it's the equitable thing to do. It's our time. We've done this before. Now let's do it for the people who need it most. And so I believe though, so my three words are coordinated, comprehensive, collaborative. Whatever we do has to be coordinated, comprehensive, and collaborative. And this committee, I believe, has to bring together, because for this to work, you need to bring the resources of all of our engines under one roof, collaborate it, coordinate the ask, make sure it's the right way and then present it. The last thing I think we have to think about, and maybe this is not the right place, but I'm going to say because it's on my mind. The RCOs and our community-based organizations are going to have to take responsibility of the vision of their communities. This idea that one development comes into a community, let's just say Homewood, and we're going to build new housing in Homewood, and the community says, okay, well, here's this list of things we have to have for you to build this affordable housing in Homewood, right? We want a community benefits agreement on this low-income housing project, and here are 25 things we want. I think rather we should say is this, as a community, here are all the amenities we want the community to have. These are the opportunities we want the people to have. And does this development fit into this wish list of things we want to have, and how does it support? Because oftentimes the housing itself is the benefit, right? The housing, giving low and working class people clean, decent, affordable housing is a community benefit. And redeveloping that community and providing a higher tax base and higher property values is itself an amenity if there's no other amenity. And so we just have to, I think we have to stop thinking about development as a one deal, and then every deal comes to a community and they say, well, you got to give us everything. Instead, there needs to be this this is the vision of our community. And then project by project, we link in to see, does this fit with our predetermined belief of what our community should look like? And I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know if I can, but that's sort of my mission over the next 2 years. So I want to just give you, because I'm going to talk about this more on Wednesday. I'm going to talk about it probably forever, over and over and over and over again until we do it. I've been talking about it privately. I've been saying these things privately every now and then publicly. Now I'm going to become public and demand that it happens. Housing, we passed legislation that housing is a right, a human right. So the city of Pittsburgh should figure out a way to raise $500 million to significantly and seriously change the direction of affordable housing in the city of Pittsburgh over the next decade. About $500 million would be a great way to begin this process. That's not all we need, but it will certainly create a housing, not boom is too strong a word, but it will slow the displacement of low and moderate income people out of the city, and it will create the possibility of truly mixed income neighborhoods in our city. So that's my sermon for today. Is there anybody else that have anything from other members of the board? If not, is there any public comment?
I don't believe there is.
If not, thank you for your patience and your indulgence, even for me. I will entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. We are adjourned.